let's move on to talk about the trans debate. I'm sure that's what everyone's here for. The Tory party is having a bit of a wobble over this question of trans conversion therapy. Now, it's interesting. I think this is an interesting point to sort of take stock as to where we are in the trans debate, because if we cast our minds back to sort of this time last year, it felt as if the sort of edifice or the house of cards, if you like, was falling down. You had the Tavistock closed down, people recognising some of the horrors that were happening there. Mermaids, the trans children charity, was being investigated by the Charity Commission. Politicians were suddenly finding the courage to say that women can't have penises.
Or not all of them.
Or not all of them. At the time, Keir Starmer
How many does he think they had? There's a
99.9%, which means that 1 in 1,000 women do have a penis.
That's still a lot of penises.
It's a lot of...
We have a lot of experimentation to do to find out.
But... Rishi Sunak seems rhetorically, again, he's quite proud of himself for saying women don't have penises. Why is this? It's well done. Do you want a gold star? It's sort of biscuit. But it's now potentially, we don't know, potentially pushing through this legislation that could roll back all those gains.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the problem, is that the bar has gotten so low. What is a kind of commonsensical response to this? And also the Tory party is playing this game, because one thing that should always be recognised about the current parliamentary Tory party is that they are responsible for a lot of these initiatives. They got behind them in a massive way. The gender recognition reform proposals, which obviously Scotland in a different form took up, but that was very much a viable proposition because Theresa May brought it forward, and she was part of that kind of tendency, which was that because we were considered the nasty party, we need to now embrace this incredibly nasty, misogynistic ideology as a way for making up for that. And you see that continued again with the question of guidance in schools around social transitioning. You see that repeated again with this point about trans conversion therapy. Your hope is that it's just going to be one of those things that Sunak kind of quietly lets fall out of the King's speech. But that's a sad state of affairs when doing something as commonsensical as ensuring that these kinds of not particularly well thought through proposals are brought in. And I think that's one thing on the trans conversion therapy thing. We should really bear that in mind, is trans conversion therapy as a branding exercise is genius, because obviously it recalls kind of the horrific, violent electrodes kind of conversion therapies that we might have seen in the past used against gay people. Whereas there's two things we obviously need to bear in mind, one of which is that trans conversion therapy, where it has been banned, can often apply to any form of non-affirmative care, as it's called. So anything that would challenge a gender-confused young person about their situation, trying to work out, is it something else? Is it autism? Is it some other issue? Could be seen as nudging up towards that ban. And the other thing that's worth bearing in mind is that an awful lot of children who present with gender dysphoria turn out to just be gay. So you put those two things together, and banning trans conversion therapy becomes a form of gay conversion therapy. And I think that's something that that point really needs to be made more in public, because as ever when you're dealing with these ideologies, is that they present themselves as being on the side of the angels, when often the details is something much murkier that we really need to confront. But unfortunately, the only hope I have for the Tory party is that they just quietly drop these things. But obviously, you can only then think that the Labour Party will resurrect a lot of these things when it does come back into power.
Well, yeah, you brought up the Labour Party. It does seem that they're in favour of this ban, but also Annalise Dodds is suggesting that people should potentially face jail time for misgendering, because at the moment some people have been arrested for it. People have been convicted for it even, but they've managed to overturn their convictions on appeal. But it would bring misgendering into line with kind of racial and religious hatred, which could mean people potentially spend time behind bars for misgendering, which, as most of us actually know, is telling the truth.
We should call it a trans jihad, and then everything's going to be fine.
Inaya.
I mean, it's just really clutching at straws. I mean, I saw something, yesterday or the day before that Stonewall was going to pick up another campaign in the next week, which was to campaign against asexual discrimination. And I just thought, wow, this is a really big problem.
It is Asexual Awareness Week, by the way, in case, just to make you all aware.
And I mean, when it comes to conversion therapy, I mean, if someone's being intimidated, if they're being threatened, if they're being coerced, that is already a crime. What this essentially is trying to do is to create an atmosphere of censorship and to essentially prevent any reasonable discussion with perhaps a young person or an adult that might be experiencing gender dysphoria and want to look at other options rather than, essentially irreversible medical surgery. And that is, a horrible situation that many politicians are signing up to in order to appear virtuous, completely ignoring all of the criticisms, all of the concerns from a whole range of different groups. And as Tom said, I mean, there's been many feminists and LGBT activists who have talked about the fact that this is the new conversion therapy, that many lesbian and gay people have talked about if they grew up today, they would have been trans because they understood when they were young that their sexual attraction to the same sex may have meant that they were not meant to be a particular sex. And therefore, if they were born today, then they would have been told by society, not only are they trans, but that is a good thing. That's the way that they should go. And so I think that, we're letting down not just, the trans people that want to just live privately in public and not have their identity politicized, but also the thousands of young gay and lesbian kids that are having their sexuality recast as trans. So I think it's a really sad example. And it's just another thing that the Conservative Party have not only failed to be conservative, but cannot stand by any particular line.
Rakib, do you think this kind of stuff poses a risk for Labour? I mean, at the moment, they're soaring ahead in the polls. Everyone's just assuming that they've got the next election in the bag. But it does become embarrassing when, Keir Starmer struggles to say what a woman is and things like that. It's a problem that they should be nipping in the bud, you'd think.
No, absolutely. And I think it's hugely embarrassing. But I think the reason why I still think that it won't do all that much damage to Labour is largely because there's issues such as the cost of living crisis, NHS backlog, housing crisis as well. And I think those issues are more immediate, if truth be told. And I think that people are really... if they're going to be thinking about things like poverty reduction, that's actually where Labour will be at an advantage, because traditionally Labour does have ownership of those kind of issues. But of course, I've looked upon, the radical transgenderism, the spread of it in recent times. I find it absolutely shocking, to be honest. But I find it interesting that they're looking to tie the sort of opposition to radical transgenderism with racial and religious hatred, when you'll probably find the greatest opposition to radical transgenderism will be within, in my view, socially conservative religious minorities. So if someone says, well, actually, religious belief is a protected characteristic, and because of my religious belief, I don't want to entertain any kind of radical transgenderism, how will the left respond to that? How will Sir Keir Starmer respond to that? If a socially conservative, one of his own socially conservative Muslim councillors says, well, actually, I don't agree with anything to do with what you're saying in terms of trans-related policy. So I think that the left is actually going to tie itself in knots, and these tensions, that they can't be reconciled. So it'd be very interesting to see how they progress.
And Konstantin, do you think this movement maybe sort of takes advantage a little bit of our kindness, our tolerance, actually? Because although they go around calling everyone transphobic, actually, a lot of us, we do want equality. We do want people to be treated fairly and equally. And a lot of very, very dangerous and bad ideas are sort of smuggled in under that banner.
Well, first of all, as someone married with a young child, I have a great deal of sympathy for the problems faced by asexual people. So Asexual Awareness Week is important, if you ask me. But I actually think I want to come back to what Tom was talking about, and this phrase, trans conversion therapy. One of the biggest takeaways from recent episodes that we've done on my show, we haven't released the episode yet, is with a guy called Michael Malice over in the US. And one of the things he said to me, it's an obvious thing actually, but it really crystallized for me what we're dealing with. He said, these people use language to manipulate, not to communicate. And the way we are going to start to win these battles, I think, is by finding language that accurately describes what we're talking about. We're not talking about trans conversion therapy. We're talking about allowing young children time to think and to make decisions about their bodies that will be with them for the rest of their lives. We have to find punchy and clear language to start to position it correctly, rather than arguing about trans conversion therapy, because when it is described as trans conversion therapy, you're never going to win that argument, ever. And so that's, I think, the point I would make. In terms of empathy, I think, frankly, at this point, everyone who actually understands this issue kind of isn't really persuaded by the argument that this is about empathy, because to me, the empathetic thing to do is to provide young people who may be gay or gender non-conforming or whatever with the opportunity to make that decision in a constructive, sensible, reasonable way with the help of time, consultations, some kind of talking therapy. These are things that they actually need. To me, that is the compassionate and empathetic thing to do. So I think it's a failure on the part of the critics of this worldview that we are in a position where their attempts to essentially transition children at a young age are being presented as the empathetic, compassionate thing, when in fact they're exactly the opposite.